Greetings, ASUM Senate. My name is Ben Borhegi, and I am submitting this public comment in the spirit of democracy to make my voice heard. That is ultimately the definition of democracy, to hear every voice and to uplift such voices when necessary so that all elected representatives may do their duty well. ASUM prides itself on being a voice of the students. That is what ASUM was created for in the first place. Since its inception, ASUM has had much success in increasing student representation on campus, primarily through funding student-led activities, leadership, and innovation. This is thanks to ASUM hearing students' needs and heeding them. This is thanks to democracy. To not have democracy is to have disorder, exclusion, authoritarianism. As senators, you should agree that a Senate that does not well represent the interests of a population is in danger of losing its democratic spirit. Democracy becomes dictatorship when voices are actively suppressed and ignored. That is the definition of a dictatorship, when a few select individuals raise their platform above others in the name of party and personal gain. Misrepresentation is a red flag of authoritarianism. Friends of the ASUM Senate, I speak today because I am troubled. I'm troubled as a student at large who sees such warning signs of authoritarianism in ASUM. Recently, I have heard several alarming reports of actions made to suppress the voices of underrepresented groups in the University of Montana student body. Adriana Medina, a senator who recently resigned, cited repeated incidents of harassment and discrimination from several other senators. She is not the only one. Other Black, Indigenous, and senators of color have faced repeated derogatory remarks from colleagues met by the blinding white silence of so-called allies. These BIPOC senators are exemplary of democracy, for they represent hundreds of students at the University of Montana who face such discrimination. From my personal experience in the Pacific Islanders Club, Black Student Union, Latinx Student Union, and Lambda, from my experience as being the only white person in the room for once, the accounts of discrimination and exclusion are without end, with just a precious few students and staff to represent these hundreds at the institutional level. Someone told me how livid they were when a former Senator Medina mentioned that she was called a wetback by a person involved in ASUM. Now, I have a confession to make. I actually was not aware of what the term wetback meant. I simply assumed that it was a grotesque slur. Then I looked up the etymology of the word, where it came from. I learned that wetback is an immigrant of Latin America, usually Mexico, who swam across the Rio Grande to legally immigrate to the United States. If one calls a refugee from Latin America who crossed a river in search of a better life and future for their family, then I wonder what they call the European colonizers who crossed a whole ocean to plunder, rape, and spread disease. These white colonizers came on ships battered by the ocean. They must have been perpetually wet, or at least sweaty for weeks. Then they arrived and caused the largest genocide to date, stretching across centuries from the Rocky Mountains in Montana to the ports in Nigeria, killing hundreds of millions of Black, Indigenous people of color and subjugating future generations to everlasting trauma. What do we call them? There's no slur of enough magnitude to capture the crimes of white colonizers in the Americas, yet you have the audacity to blame the victim and call them names you don't even know the meaning of. I do recognize that there were several senators who were shocked and outraged at Medina's story, but what they may not realize is that her story is representative of hundreds of racist actions and thousands that sit in silence. I'm talking about covert racism. Very few people would dare out themselves as a racist, and that is part of the problem. I have some degree of admiration for racists who lay their prejudices bare. I have fear of those racists who hide their racism, who are silent, who don't say anything. These white moderates are much greater in number than the overtly racist and enable such behavior. They are the bystanders to a festering problem. It is true that democracy dies in darkness, for the darkness is the white moderate who stands by and does nothing. Dr. Martin Luther King said that darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. If this statement is true, then why still do so many senators of ASUM stand by in the darkness? Their passivity, your indifference, is what keeps the darkness of racism alive. There are senators in ASUM who will make racist comments behind closed doors and then vote to condemn white supremacy the next moment in a two-faced effort to save grace. I have heard numerous accounts of inaction from senators and SALs alike, from defunding the Pacific Islanders Club without investigation to making hollow promises. Make measurable, realistic, and specific goals. Last year, the current ASUM president campaigned in the name of fair and equal representation for all. This year's, his supporters are left feeling hurt, gaslighted, and that nothing has been done. His promises to make meaningful change have been met with sloth, inaction, and apathy. Back in January, both the president and vice president went behind ASUM's back and appointed 2 white senators who openly admitted that they would not make efforts to stand up for BIPOC students. This was inherently undemocratic and highlights ASUM's lack of leadership and lack of transparency and hunger for white power. Though the senators ultimately were removed, there were no long-term consequences for betraying democracy and the trust of BIPOC senators, leaving systemic racism to fester. If ASUM hopes to have a truly democratic Senate, then no one in ASUM can stand by while their democracy dies. The path to saving the spirit of ASUM is already clear, for BIPOC ASUM senators have tirelessly been working to make their voices heard while they are met with ignorance, silence, and dismissal. But perhaps I can use my voice as a white person to repeat what has already been said. Here are some recommendations summarized from Adriana Medina's February 24th, 2021 public comment. Require anti-bias training for all senators and staff. Take responsibility for racism, discrimination, and the privilege you hold. Increase funding for cultural groups. Vet new ASUM senators as anti-racist. Increase BIPOC representation in every setting. I strongly recommend that all senators reread Medina's public comment once again after this meeting. All of these recommendations are ultimately democratic in spirit and seek to advance ASUM's agenda and work towards the good of the University of Montana. Anti-bias training and anti-racist practices for old and new senators will improve senators' ability to represent students fairly. Taking responsibility improves transparency and faith in ASUM's processes. Increased funding and representation for groups and people that advocate for underrepresented students helps to level the playing field and ultimately make their voices heard. This is how democracy works. This is the spirit of ASUM and is perfectly in line with its goals. I also have a few recommendations of my own. Call out other senators on their white supremacist and racist behavior. Silence is just as bad as being offensive, and ruling the comments of those who speak up as dilatory is even worse. Remove senators who continually demonstrate racist white supremacist behavior. They threaten the democratic processes of ASUM, undermine students' interest to advance their own, and erode the foundations of the University of Montana. Give BIPOC students credit for their ideas, insights, actions, and tireless efforts taken to better ASUM and the University of Montana. Lastly, immediately release footage of ASUM Senate meetings and update the minutes to reflect what occurred. These materials must be easily accessible too, not hidden in a website. Be even more transparent and public. To help you all meet this last recommendation, I will be taking action by making this speech public at 7:30 p.m. on Wednesday, March 3rd, 2021. It will be public on YouTube, and a transcript along with the video link will be sent to the Kaiman and shared on social media. No more hiding in the shadows. ASUM must be fully transparent and own up to their actions, as we all should when combating the hate of white supremacy. Racism and white supremacy is unacceptable. It hurts all of us, not just the students of color. If ASUM fails to represent students on the basis of skin tone, then that means that they are likely failing to represent students on the basis of gender, ability, class, and sexual orientation. ASUM is in danger of becoming dominated by straight, white, rich, able-bodied males. While I hold nothing personally against these people, I fully acknowledge that they do not and cannot represent a student body as complex and diverse as the body of the University of Montana. It will be our ruin lest the senators of ASUM take meaningful action to actively work against white supremacy, or I, as a concerned student of the University of Montana, fear autocracy. Thank you.